We are recording.
Great, thank you. Hello and welcome. I call to order this March 31st, 2021 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. As a preliminary matter, allow me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Josh Levy?
Here.
Barry Kaufman?
Here.
John Conley?
Here.
Tom Jacob?
Here.
Rick Lunetta?
Here.
Louise Miller?
Here.
Dick Riley?
Here.
Jim Healy?
Here.
And staff member Louise Misgard.
Here.
Good evening. This open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Except for the agenda item entitled Citizen Request to Address the Finance Committee, this meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, the Needham Finance Committee is convening by Zoom app as posted on the town's website. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body will be available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. And finally, as a first order of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued to the committee's next meeting of April 7th, 2021, if a technical problem develops. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, Barry Kaufman?
Yep. Yes.
Tom Jacob?
Yes.
Josh Levy?
Yes.
John Conley?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
Yes.
Louise Miller?
Yes.
Rick Lunetta?
Yes.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
And the chair, yes, as well. Thank you. First item on the agenda is any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee. Dave, is there any citizen?
Madam Chair, we have Barry Pollock who has his hand raised. I can bring him in.
Great, please do. Hello, Mr. Pollock. Welcome to the Needham Finance Committee. How are you? And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So thank you, by the way, for sending along all that information prior to the meeting. That was helpful. And you had said you wanted to address the Finance Committee, so the floor is yours. I should let you know that we do have a very long agenda in front of us tonight, so I ask you to keep your remarks under 5 minutes.
I will do my best. I thank you for the time. I want to be clear about what I'm not asking for today. To start, I'm not asking for policy decisions, and I'm not asking for a vote in favor of changes to knock down a floor or some information that may have been relayed to you to that extent. I am asking you to take a close look at the use of funds for a traffic study that was supposed to take place and was handled differently than all of the expectations. And I am asking you to reject at least the maximum FAR that the planning board continues to pursue in overdeveloping the Muzzy parcel and giving it the benefits of that rezoning Not far off, and I would still say substantially similar to the 1.75 FAR that was proposed and failed at town meeting in the fall of 2019. It still sits at 1.35 as a potential FAR, which is excessive. And I'd like to talk about some of the traffic data that was used. I would say that I have a motion to amend that I'm working with town council on that would bring that down. And I would ask that before you vote to approve or reject the existing proposal as revised recently by the planning board, that you await what I would be able to submit to you after town council's input that would address the FAR. There are two purposes the town has stated at the highest levels for rezoning Muzzy. One is to increase the tax base, and the other is to eliminate some unfavorable uses, industrial uses, and some talk or threats about a warehouse. I would remind you all that any articles that have been written recently about the hulking warehouse that could go in there is ignoring the present FAR. That would be far below what Amazon does, and based on the public records requests that I've received, and I think I've included this one as well in your packet. If not, I can submit it. There's been a recognition between planning board members by email that Amazon is not as real a threat. It's not looking to build new warehouses. It couldn't build one of its hulking 600,000 square foot warehouses there. And to the extent that a small delivery or modest delivery station could fit there, Amazon is looking for existing facilities, and that's out of the emails of the planning board members specifically. The two stated purposes can be accomplished with less than a 1.35 FAR. A 1.0 maximum would solve the issues of eliminating the warehouse or other industrial use, because that would be doubling the existing use and increasing what could be done with special permit by 1/3. But there's also the option, which I'm working with town council, that if there is going to be an FAR above 1.0, so for instance, if it were to go to 1.2, it would force that last 0.2 to be a use that wouldn't contribute to the traffic nightmares that the traffic engineer reported to those of you who attended the joint meeting in November 18th. You were there. Some of you asked the important questions and got answers there that weren't really expressed the same way at the subsequent community meetings. And I'll just remind you of that as I get to that. So with an FAR that would range from 0.7 as of right, as the planning board has revised that down, and it would allow nearly a 50% increase from that for still office space use by going to a 1.0. The other 0.2 could be used by a developer who would devote that 0.2 to housing or a recreational or sports type use. The YMCA is exploring a capital campaign so that it could put a full service facility there, which the reaction has been overwhelming from community members in favor of something like that. It's tough for the YMCA to do a capital campaign if it needs to count on a special permit. And some of these issues are being addressed in the motion to amend with town council, who believes these things can be addressed in an adequate motion to amend. I do believe that without reducing that FAR, the planning board's not going to get the necessary approval of town meeting members based on meetings we've been having among different precincts and conversations I've been having. So there could be a lot of wasted time and effort. But let me talk about the funds that were made available for the new traffic study. As you know,
Mr. Pollock, excuse me, you've gone over your 5, but I'll give you 2 more minutes. You can hopefully wrap it up by then.
I will do my best. I think I want to thank everyone. I hope that my thank you doesn't count, because I do think this is an important issue to all of you, to hundreds of residents, more than 800 which have signed a petition. And I'm sure it's important to the town officials and to the Muzzy family members that the right decision gets made here that can have such an impact on so many people. So in January 2020, an email from the planning director to the town manager recognized that the nearly 5-year-old data was no longer good. And quote, "We may be setting ourselves up for failure if we do not update this information." So there were funds allotted. I think it was roughly $30,000 to do a new traffic study that just could not be done when March rolled around because of the pandemic. So while there was a plan to get good data rather than use the old data and to spend town money on it, that couldn't be done. Instead, the town's retained traffic engineer opined that because the Mass DOT has allowed existing Mass DOT projects and projects for safety and maintenance purposes that need to be done to rely on data that otherwise would be old, nobody could, admittedly, everyone would say nobody could go out in March, April, and through now and get new traffic data that you can rely on. So that'd be something. So the Mass DOT took the position, don't try to get new data that's really worthless. Take into account developments and use the best data you have. The Mass DOT has never said, and you boards in various towns that want to engage in an aggressive and rushed zoning change, feel free to use data that you've already said in writing is outdated and falls outside of accepted practices. Rather than quote, which would have taken a few minutes, you all were at the meeting, the joint meeting in November. You know that there was a report made to you, and these things have been quoted and submitted to you, that state mitigation for a 1.35 FAR will require a new turn lane on Gould up near Central and on Hunting Road near Highland. The presentations to the community now instead state, we're not proposing that. We're just going to put it on a developer. Well, one way or the other, it has to get done. And that means lawns are going to become lanes. And there should be transparency about that and an open discussion, because one cannot look or listen to the recorded conversation responding to your questions in the November joint meeting and listen to what happened at the recent community meetings and say that those things are consistent. They were not. One of you even asked, are these takings in the schematics? And the answer was no, they're not. So naturally, what was shown to the public did not involve the actual need for mitigation that right now is said will be handled by the developer, but it's still going to require the same sacrifice by homeowners. And when it comes to something as important as that, I think there needs to be, and the 800 people who signed plus people who signed the petition, more than 35% of whom are from 02492, showing this is not just NIMBYs, as some people put it in town meetings. These are people across town wanting to take pride and do this right because this is an important project. So I'd close by asking all of you to consider the stated purposes, how it can be handled, and whether the planning board, which, by the way, I hope some of you were on the planning board's call, because when they did bring some of the numbers down or made them better so it was less imposing and less out of proportion to the neighborhood, they were actually commenting. One person said, we've heard enough objections, I'm done. It was a 4-to-1 vote. Another person said, this is all arbitrary now. We're flying blind, was the exact quote, by reducing these numbers. How can that be? If you have the right data, there should be a curve plotted that would show, as you increase FAR, here's the problems with traffic. As you increase FAR, here's the benefits to tax base. So that there should be an answer. If you set it at 1.0, as I'm suggesting, instead of 1.35, you solve the usage, you increase the tax base, maybe it's 8-fold instead of 10-fold. The town keeps saying, with our proposal, you go to 1.35, you get $5 million. Right now we get 500. Well, at 1.0, or even going to 1.2, by taking that other 20% and making it mixed uses, better uses, the need for housing, the use of sports and recreation that can support our exhausted schools, because they're tapped, right? We know that.
Mr. Pollock, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to end, because we do have the planning board coming in next and I have to get through the whole agenda. So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
Thank you
I'm
very
happy
much.
to answer any questions anybody has about these numbers and my submissions, because I just think the data should be better for you and this shouldn't be as rushed.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time that you've taken to come and speak to us. Dave, is there anybody, other citizens?
There are no other citizens, and Mr. Pollock, I'll move you back to the attendees. And there are no other hands raised.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we can move to approval of the minutes of March 24th, 2021. I know there were a few comments on the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those edited minutes?
I move
So
their
moved.
approval.
I'll second.
Thank you. Voice vote, Rick? Barry?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Louise?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. And next, we will be hearing from the planning board on Article 5, 6, 7, and 8, zoning for highway commercial 1 district.
Madam Chair, I will bring in Jean McKnight and Lee Newman, and they'll let me know if they want others to join.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh. Sorry, Jean McKnight. I'm having a problem with my camera and I'm going to relocate my computer. I don't understand why I'm having this problem.
Also, while we're waiting, Dave, I think you should admit Adam Block.
Adam Block is coming in. Anyone else?
I know that Marianne Cooley had emailed me. Was she going to be part of this discussion?
I believe that she plans to attend as well.
Okay, so we'll be on the lookout for her. Great. Well, thank you for coming. If you want to, I'm sure you have a planned presentation as well. So Jean, I'll turn it over to you. I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
I can. I can't hear Jean.
So perhaps while we're waiting for Jean's audio to resolve, are we able to bring Marianne in? Dave, do you see her?
I am looking for,
If
I am bringing Miss Cooley in.
Great, and if somebody can contact Mrs. McKnight and let her know that nobody can hear her.
I suspect that she'll probably leave and then resume. Very good.
Marianne, thank you for coming.
Marianne, you are on mute.
I was just saying thank you to Carol, but I'm only here for the phone a friend option.
I have a couple of remarks, and then I have a couple of Excel spreadsheets, which I thought may be helpful if we jump into the detail of things.
Sure.
And yet, Lee, would you recommend that I just proceed, or should we wait another moment for Jean?
Why don't you start so we don't, because they have a tight agenda.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Madam Chair. As most of you know, the Planning Board's proposed zoning change for Highway Commercial 1 is the result of a process that began 7 years ago as part of a review of the town's industrial districts, stemming from the successful rezoning of the New England Business Center. This process has included over 45 public meetings, all of which have informed the zoning framework. What began as a larger district extending from Highland Avenue to Crawford and Ellis with a maximum FAR of 1.75, a sixth floor near 128, a 20-foot setback off Highland and Gould, and a 20% open space requirement, as has been presented at town meeting in 2019, has since been significantly reduced in scale and scope as a result of a series of additional public meetings over the past 2 years. We firmly believe this is the proposal to achieve our primary goal of improving this industrial area as our gateway, while unlocking substantial benefits for the town now, before the market gets ahead of us, where the town's hands are tied to a Norwood-like dealership or a distribution warehouse for the next 50 years at our gateway. We are sending this proposal to town meeting for an up or down vote, and we are asking for your affirmative support. And if I'm able to share my screen, then I'm happy to share the dimensional requirements and use tables if that's something that's of interest to the board, to your committee.
I think why don't you do that, Adam, since they have recently changed, and I just want to make sure everybody.
Very good, happy to. So can you see this Excel spreadsheet, and can you see my cursor moving?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So what you see before you here are two tables. One that existed as the planning board's proposal up until our meeting last week, and on the right is our 2021 town meeting warrant proposal. And we've broken this down into two categories. The first category is the proposal within 200.
Madam Chair, I don't know if it makes a difference, but I see nothing at this point.
Yeah, Adam, I see a white line.
I just have a white column, Madam Chair.
Right.
Okay, I appreciate that. I apologize, Madam Chair. If you bear with me one moment, I'll try this again. Madam Chair, can you see both tables now?
It's a Word document.
Okay. I appreciate that. Again, is that a Word document?
No, now we're back to the table.
You see the table?
Yes.
Can you see the full table?
Could
Yeah.
you increase the size a bit?
Yeah, just make it bigger.
Absolutely. Is that better? I can even go farther. How's that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I can move this around a little bit on the screen. I could probably enlarge it too, I think. I appreciate your patience. Is that better? Can everybody see this now? So on the left side, we have the proposal, the previous 2021 proposal. We have the zoning elements running down on the left side. And then we also have the condition by right and by special permit on the left side within 200 feet of Highland and Gould, and then outside of 200 feet from Highland and Gould. I'd like to call your attention to the right side of the table where it says the 2021 town meeting warrant proposal, because this is the proposal that has been, that's our latest and final proposal. And I want to walk through the changes with you if you'd like, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
So the substantive changes that we've made last week. First, the floor area ratio by right has been reduced from 1.0 to 0.7. And that's the same for within 200 feet from Highland and Gould, and beyond 200 feet from Highland and Gould, as you can see here and here. We have reduced the special permit height within 200 feet of Highland and Gould from 48 stories, as you can see on the left side under special permit, to 42 feet by special permit. It's 3 stories, but it's a much shorter height. And then another substantive change was made to the front setback, where it had been 20 feet. It's now 50 feet, as you can see with these red markings, the red text. And finally, the minimum open space requirement has been increased from 20% to 25%, as you see reflected by, again, the red text. Another change that was made was to remove a provision in the bylaw that enabled the planning board under certain circumstances to increase certain dimensional requirements by 25% by special permit. We have eliminated that provision. So these are the substantive changes. I have another spreadsheet which summarizes the fiscal impact. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to proceed to that spreadsheet.
Is the fiscal impact of these most recent changes?
So the fiscal impact has not been reduced to the 0.7 FAR, but we are using a measure of 0.7 against the balance of the fiscal impact. So we have a fair approximation of where we think we would end up based on a 0.7 FAR. So can you see this spreadsheet? The fiscal impact summary?
Yes.
So what you see here now is the gross revenue it currently generates under the existing conditions, just under 500,000 to the town. We've also incorporated what a potential warehouse use is, and we've heard from a previous speaker that a warehouse is unlikely, and that there may have been talk before about how it's really nothing. And unfortunately, that member may not have been reading the trades or the Globe, in which we have actually found that, in fact, Amazon, among other distribution warehouse users, has shifted their distribution strategy. They used to operate on a regional basis with 1 million square feet, as they have a facility, for instance, in Fall River, which stretches from the Cape up to Brockton, services Rhode Island, and continues into Connecticut. They've shifted their strategy to now being in suburban communities. And this site is particularly appealing because not just Needham, but Newton. It services all of these communities together with Wellesley and Dedham, right on the highway, within less than 20 minutes from each other. And in fact, of the 24 built or proposed facilities, many of them are far below the 1 million square foot mark and less. And in fact, they've shifted to a model of less than 200,000 square feet. So some members of the public may be misinformed, and I think it's important that we all recognize the market reality that Amazon and other distribution warehouse developers, including Wayfair, Walmart, and others, are looking for sites at key transportation intersections that serve a broad, wealthy community that have easy access. So for that reason, the warehouse is displayed here on the fiscal impact. You see the gross revenue generating to the town at $923,000, municipal expenses of roughly $180,000, yielding a net benefit to the town of roughly $744,000 a year. We then have our fiscal impact analysis showing with housing by right and by special permit. The by right condition, which our original fiscal impact study was designed to look at a 1.0 FAR, revealed at that point 5.8 million in gross tax revenue to the town, municipal expenses of 1,155,000, yielding a net revenue position to the town of over $4.6 million. Now, what I've done here is I've made a ratio calculation at a 0.7. So this figure, 3.25 million, represents 70% of the 4.6 million. It's not an exact science, but at least it does give us a ballpark of where the net position would be to the town with a 1.0, with a 0.7 FAR build, which would include housing.
Mhm.
And then by a special permit at 1.35 FAR, we see 7.5 million in gross revenue a year, municipal expenses of almost 1.5 million, and a net position of just over $6 million in positive cash to the town. The next build condition is, again, initially modeled at a 1.0. This was office or lab use, and this was without housing, and also included a portion perhaps of retail. Gross revenue is generating 6.7 million. There's a little less than 400,000 in the municipal expenses, which based on a 1.0 FAR was $6.3 million in net positive cash to the town. But again, using a fairly approximate but reasonable figure at 0.7 FAR, again, this is with no housing, was yielding just under 4.5 million per year to the town. Under the maximum special permit FAR, we see that gross revenue is generating approximately $8.8 million with municipal expenses of 500,000 that yields a net positive cash position to the town of $8.3 million a year. Those are the two magic spreadsheets that I have, and I'm happy to continue to go back and forth as you wish.
So this doesn't reflect it doesn't really reflect the setbacks, right? The increase.
It's a fiscal impact would not necessarily in itself be adjusted by a setback. The significant factor is substantially the FAR component.
Okay. And what might this do to traffic?
So what we know is that depending on what level of build out is completed by a developer, what our traffic impact analysis was based on the larger build at 1.35 FAR. So we would anticipate that it would be, a less of an impact on traffic.
Thank you. Jean, I know that you missed a lot of the presentation. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss? We lost you for quite a while.
Wait a minute. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, then you can see me and hear me. I'm very sorry. Adam has done a very, very good job throughout this process of taking the lead in the presentation of this. And I will continue at this meeting to rely on Adam in that regard. Since I don't know the particular questions that you've asked, I let the meeting go on. And if there is anything in particular I wish to add as we go forward, I will do so.
Sure. Why don't we, unless anybody else has something to add to the presentation, maybe we can turn it to the Finance Committee for questions. anybody have any questions or comments? John?
Yeah, I've sort of two sets of questions. In the first is with respect to the table, the use table.
Would you like me to bring that up?
No, just my question is sort of general. Can I get an explanation of what thinking went into what is translated or what is proposed to be as of right versus what is proposed to be by special permit? And what's the difference between the two? Why were some carried over from the existing by as a matter of use to the proposed by a matter of use, and what was changed or left off and made now by special permit? So I'd just like an analysis or some explanation as to the thought process as to why are things in a by right category and why are other things in a by special permit category? That's my first question. I have more, but that's my first question.
Would you like me to address your first question first, or would you like to ask your second question and then we'll handle them sequentially?
Please answer that one. Through the chair, can you answer that one first?
Sure. I can bring up a use table if that would be helpful for everybody to show some of the particular changes that have been made, or I can just speak narratively from it. Would you prefer me to display?
I think we
No,
can.
I'm asking, it's a generic question as to explain the thought process between what matters were carried over for by use and then what were not carried over for by use is what I'd like to hear, please.
So the significant difference between a by right condition and a special permit condition is largely based on the authority that's bestowed upon the planning board for various elements of mitigation. And that includes things like size, and it includes use as a particular function of that. So for instance, a sports complex under the existing zoning is allowed by right. But when this zoning was prepared maybe over 50 years ago, a gym at the time was something that's very different than a sports complex today. A sports complex today, much like the facility that many in the community have been speaking about and comparing to the Boston Sports Institute on Route 9 in Wellesley, these facilities are 120,000 square feet. They generate 3,000 vehicle trips per day. So over the course of a weekday, that's 3,000 trips. On the weekend, it's 2,500 trips. They also typically include medical treatments, spa treatments, these kinds of things that would ordinarily be governed under a special permit. Plus, as an intensive traffic user, they're also an intensive parking generator. And again, that's something that would be governed under a special permit today, as athletic facilities are governed under the whole of Needham today by special permit in all of our districts. Retail is a condition of size. We allow here retail, which under the existing zoning is by right 5,750 square feet. We continue that by right use and size, but when it's over 5,750 square feet, up to 10,000 square feet, whether a grocery store or other retail business, we've made that a requirement of a special permit because we want greater control over what is going in here at our gateway. That's the primary policy objective, is to increase the authority that the town has on anything that would go through and become our gateway.
Okay, so if I could then, if I read your chart correctly, offices and laboratory and R&D space are both allowed under this proposal as a matter of right. So if that's the case, and a proposal for either offices or R&D space come in and they comply with the setback and other requirements that you have, what control does the town have over those projects?
So first of all, any project that is built that's under 10,000 square feet would be subject to a minor site plan review, which does not bestow on the town as much or as significant authority to control development as a site plan special permit would for a building constructed over 10,000 square feet, all of which we would expect to be built over 10,000 square feet. And yet, a special permit itself, not a site plan special permit, allows the town to alter any element and to deny the application completely. It is the maximum level of authority that the town can exert over a development. A site plan special permit, to be clear, gives enables the developer to proceed by right. All that the town can do is mitigate drainage, stormwater, some traffic controls, and these type of things. But it is a very different scope of authority that's bestowed upon the town by way of a regular special permit.
I think maybe I misspoke my question, and if so, I apologize for that, Barry. My question is that offices and R&D labs, which under this proposal would be allowed as of right, and if they came in within the, not asking for any greater FAR than what they would be allowed under this proposal, and complying with the setbacks that you set forth with this proposal, with that going forward, in R&D or office, my understanding is that there's no traffic mitigation control that the town would be able to impose in that situation.
That's
Am I
not
correct?
No.
And tell me how I'm incorrect, please.
Respectfully, you're incorrect because of the major site plan special permit, which is required under any construction above 10,000 square feet, bestows upon the planning board the authority to mitigate for traffic.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So my other set of questions had to do with the fiscal impact.
Yes.
Which chart you showed. And my first question is, I'm really struck by the difference between what the current assessed value of the property is and what the projected assessed value is. And I guess my first question is was an analysis done if the existing conditions were built out to their fullest max as they could as of right currently? My understanding is it could be offices, it could be R&D space, laboratory space currently. If that was built out to the full max that would be allowed currently, it would seem to me that it would be much greater than the 900,000 that you have for a warehouse. And so was that analysis done? So we can accurately depict what sort of the maximum case currently is versus what the maximum case is under your proposal, which is clearly what you're showing there.
We can ask Dave Davison perhaps maybe to comment. I would say though that that was not part of the original scope of the fiscal impact analysis to measure out what the existing conditions would allow at its maximum point.
But yet, isn't that what you did with respect to your proposed ones? So it would seem to me to have a fair comparison, you should have a max out on current versus a max out on proposed.
Perhaps another way to look at it, if I may, is the existing FAR under the existing bylaw is 0.5, we're talking about a by right condition right now of 0.7. So we would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.2 less than what we're at now under the by right condition without the housing element.
So then wouldn't that mean then the existing condition, or not existing condition, but condition under current zoning would be much closer to the 260 million that you have here if you had it out to the maximum the way you have it for the proposal? And I don't need an answer. I just wanted that's a question that I have, just so you know, that's a question that me as a finance committee member have.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick?
Yeah, let me just follow up, if I may, on John's. It's my understanding, Mr. Block, that you just extrapolated to go from 1.0 to 0.7. You took 70% of the number. Well, if your assumption then is correct as to the 0.5, is there any reason that the logical thing is we shouldn't take 5/7 of the number you project? Would that be the logical? Wait, let me say what our obligation at the Finance Committee, I think, is to make sure the town has a clear understanding of the financial implications of what they're being asked to vote on. And I think John's point was the table that is presented doesn't do that. In order to do that, we've got to present, if you will, highest and best use under the current circumstances. What would the financial impact of the town be versus what you projected? It strikes me that the approach you took of 7/9 could be 7/10. It could be 5/7 of the number you projected. Am I correct? That's how you got to your number?
It's correct that for the purposes of this discussion, that under the recently revised FAR by right move from 1.0 to 0.7, I did take a roughly 70% calculation. We've made our changes in less than a week. I'd have to get back to you to answer your question to be more precise.
Yeah, I think in order for me to vote on this, I'd have to understand, as I said, our obligation is to make sure that the town has before it accurate financial information on which to make their judgments. And I don't think the materials that have been presented so far achieve that end.
I've noted that. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess along the same lines as the question Dick asked, we had a detailed traffic impact study and we had the financial impact study as well related to the original proposal. So given the recent changes, what do you see as the data that are still relevant to the new proposal, and which data do you not think are no longer relevant?
So it's a funny thing developing proactively as opposed to reactively with a builder, because the most critical element is ultimately what happens when a developer presents a proposal within the broad framework. So what we had all established in the working committee, including with the finance committee, those goals included setting out what would be the worst case scenario for traffic and what under certain conditions would be the net revenue and fiscal impact to the town at the time of a 1.0 FAR and a 1.35 FAR. And in terms of the traffic, we were always we all had agreement together that we were studying the traffic impact at a 1.35 basis. So we know that whether a build out is at 1.0 before the planning board made its change last week, that a 1.0 FAR would derive less traffic than a 1.35 FAR. And so therefore we know that it's true that a by right build of 0.7 would have a less impact on traffic than a 1.35 FAR build out would. But none of us required the measuring of a traffic impact at the 1.0 FAR, now nor at the 0.7 FAR. I would like an opportunity to be able to respond to Mr. Connolly and Mr. Riley's questions about an updated financial information for the 0.7 condition to deliver more precise information to you.
Okay. And then one other question, is this new proposal going to be printed in the warrant, or is that going to be submitted as an amendment?
It's going to be printed in the warrant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barry, did you have a question?
Just for clarification, this is the entire parcel, correct? Including where Channel 5 is located in addition to where Muzzy is. So the assumption would be both pieces of property would ultimately have to be purchased to be developed under these conditions. Okay.
Correct.
So I have a question. If at a 0.7 FAR, which is what we are now, if there needs to be traffic mitigation, so as of right, does the planning board still have the ability to dictate to the developer that they bear the cost of that traffic mitigation?
So the answer is yes, and the reason is because anything that they build, we would anticipate, would be larger than 10,000 square feet. That 10,000 square feet is the magic trigger for what's called a site plan special permit. Even if they build under a by right condition, because of their size, they're governed under the site plan special permit, which bestows to the planning board powers to mitigate for traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Nope. Great. Louise, I don't know if she's not there right now. Okay. Mrs. McKnight, Adam, Lee, thank you very much. Mary Ann, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I'll move the 3 members to the attendees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good one. Again, I'm still on. I can still go to stay.
If you're going to move me also, right?
Yes, Ms. Cooley.
Thank you. Bye, you guys.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm not certain who to bring in for Article 8.
Oh.
George Junta is coming?
I saw him, yes. I'll bring him in.
Thank you.
Let me know when to begin, Madam Chair.
Oh, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for coming. So why don't you introduce yourself and talk about the map change to the general residence B zoning district.
Sure thing. Thank you. Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. My name is George Junta Jr. I know some of you should know me. It's been quite a while since the last time I've been before this committee. And I'm here this evening with respect to a proposed zoning change, a map change to move properties that are currently in the SRA zone into the SRB zone. And with your permission, I'd like to share my screen, just make it a little easier to orient you so you can see what properties we're talking about. Okay. It's a little bigger. Okay, so we're dealing with 23 properties that are generally located along the side of Hunting Road, although they end sort of at the point where Greendale and Hunting intersect, where Hunting transforms into Greendale. So you can see here, this is a section from the zoning map. This here is Route 128, the highway. This pink is the New England Business Center. The Muzzy site is up here that we you just heard a presentation on. So this is Hunting Road coming down here. And these properties here in yellow are the 23 properties in question. And so really, now that you've seen sort of where they are, what we're talking about, I can turn this off and just sort of talk to you. So basically, these 23 properties are all currently in the SRA, or 1 acre zoning district. Directly across the street on the other side of Hunting Road, all of the properties are located in the SRB, or 10,000 square foot district. For some reason, apparently in 1970, the acre zone, which was on the other side of the highway, got extended to Hunting Road, putting all these properties that had already been laid out and developed into the acre zone. Now, the problem with that is currently not a single one of these 23 properties conform with area requirements. And of the 23, only 4 of them conform with frontage requirements for the acre zone. So as a result, all 23 lots are currently non-conforming with respect to zoning requirements. In addition, several of the existing houses on these lots are also non-conforming with respect to front yard setback requirements that apply in the acre zone district. So my client owns one of the properties in this area, and for quite a while, he and several other people who own properties in this area have wanted to change the zoning. And effectively, starting I think about 2 years ago, it started to pick up enough momentum to make the effort. So he now, along with most of his neighbors, are looking to put their properties into the 10,000 square foot zone, which would make almost all of the properties conforming with respect to area and frontage, as well as setbacks. As a side note, properties in the SRA zoning district have larger setback requirements than properties in the SRB district. I already mentioned several of the properties in this district don't comply with the front yard setback. And this is an issue with respect to these properties for people who want to put additions on their homes first and foremost. I, for one, probably 10 years ago, represented one of the owners in this area before the Board of Appeals for special permit. And that's part of the issue that these owners are faced with. Because their properties are non-conforming and several of the houses are non-conforming, if they want to put an addition on, they quite often have to go to the Board of Appeals, which means a time delay, additional expense, and there is never a certainty to get an approval. Certainly if you've got any sort of existing or long-standing gripe or beef with any of your neighbors. So really what we're trying to do is put these properties into a district that reflects what the real condition is, that mirrors what's on the other side of the street, and to us seems an appropriate way to handle these properties sort of going forward. I will make a note, when this first came up a year and a half ago or so, there was some discussion about keeping a buffer. And I would say that this section of this acre zone strip is fundamentally and substantially different than the acre zone strip that is roughly south of Cheney Street. South of Cheney Street, you have large swaths of undeveloped land, of forested land, but these 23 properties are all currently developed. There isn't any vacant land remaining. So it's a fundamental different area than sort of south of Cheney Street. And so with that, I'd happily answer any questions you have.
Dick?
Again, I seem to be on the financial impact side of these things. are the houses in question assessed any differently than the corresponding house across the street?
You know, I've not specifically looked at that. That's something I can look at and address. I can say, you know, I did look at the assessments just out of curiosity to see, and the average tax assessment was somewhere around the neighborhood of 442,000, which certainly seems quite low for a single-family house in Needham. Now, I will note that 2 of the houses in this section of Hunting Road sold in the last year and a half or so. One sold for 725,000, and the other one sold for 800,000, which gives you an idea of how off the assessments currently are to market. But I would say, I mean, to me, 442,000 seems lower than what it should be for these lots.
So help me out. What would be the financial impact of the town of making this requested change in the zoning, the posture, if you will, of the map, rather?
So just sort of thinking out loud, there would be, I mean, I would say, in short, I would expect that the financial impact would be small, you know, minimal, if anything, really. But what you would see is, I do know in the past, over the last 10, 15 years or more, that some of these homeowners were unable or unwilling to undertake home improvement projects in terms of putting on additions because of the current zoning restrictions. So by moving these properties from SRA to SRB, it makes it a lot more flexible for the owners to add on to their homes with additions, which would therefore increase the value and therefore would have some modest or minor increase in tax value.
Let me just keep going in one respect, if I could. Could I ask Dave Davidson whether there's the fact that property is a non-conforming use, does that factor into the valuation for assessment purposes?
It's a de minimis impact in terms of the value, because you have a single family home. There's a market value associated with the single family home. Larger parcels don't necessarily generate that much more taxes. A single family home lot is a single family home lot, whether it's 5,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet. All you can build is a single family home. Certain improvements that, if it's more easily to do, would add some new growth value.
But let me ask you, non-conforming doesn't carry with it an automatic 10% discount, for example?
No, it does not.
No, thank you.
Jim?
I would say non-conforming is actually a negative. It's not a positive from a value standpoint.
That's what I would assume.
Pardon me? Okay, sure. But my point is that I think the point of all these properties, and for those of us that have been in the area, there's no backyard. The backyard is 128. So it is completely different from south of Cheney. I think, frankly, that every property there that is there now is already non-conforming. And to the extent that we now say you're going to be conforming means nothing, except that it would help the homeowners. So I think Mr. Junta's case is very well played.
Barry, did you have a comment?
This is just a different type of question, but if they were how did it get built that way if it had acre zoning, or was the acre zoning put in after these were all built?
So I can't answer that definitively for all of the 23, but I certainly know for a fact for several of the 23 that the houses themselves were built in the 60s. And as I already indicated, the zoning change that put this strip into the acre zone was the special town meeting in October 1970. So they were presumably built then. And I believe especially the sort of the block that is comprised of Cheney, Hunting, and Kendrick, that sort of roughly square block, that was probably well before that, because the lots on Cheney are the smallest of this section. And in fact, one of them is fully non-conforming and could only exist if it was going way back.
So John, you must remember that town meeting.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Jim and I were both here in 1970. Not in our, we were a little smaller then. Shorter, certainly, in my case.
Mark
And all those
Weinstein,
houses were
Mark
in
Weinstein
existence.
lived in one of those homes that I visited, yes.
Right. And those houses all existed then, which leads into my question, George. In 1970, was this an oversight or was there something purposeful about the zoning change that was put into place there? Was it again, a mistake or something purposeful? And do you know that? Either way.
So all I have is hearsay and speculation, but nothing definitive. But my understanding is there was a thought that by putting all of the properties, basically from Highland Avenue all the way down to Great Plain Avenue, that were on that easterly side of Hunting and Greendale, putting them in the acre zone, would create a buffer between the 10,000 square foot lots on the westerly side of Hunting and Greendale and the highway and the industrial activities on the other side of the highway. So it basically was to create a buffer zone. But the odd thing is, you know, that makes a lot of sense south of Cheney Street, because
Right.
you already had lots down there that were acre or more in large tracts, you know, multi-acre tracts of undeveloped land. But, you know, certainly just the clump between Cheney Street and Kendrick, you know, as I said, I mean, you've got a lot there that's only 40 feet wide, and then two lots that are 70 feet wide. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that area. And then even moving up Hunting, the depth of the lots, there's not, having them in the acre zone doesn't really provide a lot of buffer. Now, the one thing that it did do, and still does to some degree, is it makes it more difficult if somebody came in there and bought several of the properties. You know, if this were in the SRB zone, they would be able to reconfigure the lot lines and maybe create an additional lot here and an additional lot there. But, you know, from a practical standpoint, you're not talking about a wholesale change. You're talking about, you know, over a 20-year period, maybe 2 new lots or something like that. Because the only way it'd be a wholesale change is if somebody acquired, really they'd have to do the entire strip from Kendrick all the way up, which would be 12 properties. You know, if you assume, you know, roughly 750,000 each, just as a rolling figure based on the 2 sales recently, you know, you're talking about an acquisition price of $9 million, and it probably would be more than that. So somebody, you know, so it wouldn't be a wholesale change. So as far as the purpose, I think it was to create a buffer, and I think it didn't, for this part of town, it didn't really create much of a buffer, and I don't think it really serves much useful purpose going forward.
And what I understand you're doing now is, back then, sort of below Cheney Street and above Cheney Street weren't separated. Now you're making that separation. And still what remains, I'm going to call it below Cheney Street, from there heading towards St. Bart's area, will all remain SRB. It's just this chunk of going north that you're changing through this proposal.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the horse has already left the barn on the buffer zone, okay? I don't know if you saw the, 300 home place on Greendale Avenue. So the Board of Selectmen and everyone else just abdicated on that. So why we care about these people is baloney.
So, Tom?
Just a quick question. What is the planning board's perspective?
I think it's about the FAR and what the cost value is going to be.
I'm asking George, and I assume they've presented.
So I haven't presented this go around, but when this came up last year, this was supposed to go before Springtown meeting last year, but we pulled it because of the time constraints with COVID and all. But we did have the hearing with planning, and planning was generally receptive. They thought it made sense. They didn't have any objections to it. They basically didn't understand why it hadn't already changed, quite frankly.
Thank you.
So it sounds to me that there's a somewhat de minimis, slight positive financial impact to this article. Does everybody agree with that, or what?
Seems to me that's the case. If anything, it makes it easier to expand build outs, and that would, if that is done, it creates more taxable revenue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. John?
Did I make a motion?
Yeah.
I would make a motion that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of Article number 8, citizen petition, zoning, map change, residence speak.
Second.
Great. A voice vote, Barry Kaufman,
Yes.
Rick Lunetta,
Yes.
Tom Jacob,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Louise Miller. I don't think she's here still. Myself, the chair, yes, and Dick Riley.
Yes.
Great. Passed. Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Nice
for your
nice
time.
to see you, George.
Same here, Jim.
Did George?
Yeah, good evening.
I'll move you to the attendees, George.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, do you wish to have Lee Newman rejoin
Yes.
for
please.
Article 12?
Mhm. We thank you for coming back to our meeting.
Thank you. I also have Jean McKnight present, if you'd like to admit her.
Sure.
Ian McKnight is coming in.
Thank you. I am here.
Thank you. So I turn it over to you, Lee and Jean.
Okay, well, I think as a follow-up from our last meeting, you asked me to put together a memo to make, I think, a little clearer what the intent was for the funding for the $60,000. And you should have received a memo, which I think outlines that. But briefly, I think we're looking for appropriation to cover two functional areas. One would be professional services on an as-needed basis to support the regulatory functions of the department. And the other would be to cover professional services in support of land use and planning initiatives that the board is contemplating. In terms of the first piece, which is on the as-needed basis, I think this would be to help the department with its regulatory functions in terms of its day-to-day operations, and it would allow us to procure services as needed in largely in transportation, planning, engineering, and fiscal impact analysis to support the skill set of the staff. In terms of the planning initiatives, I think I've laid out, I talked to you briefly about, I think, a couple areas where the planning board was interested in engaging in over the course of the next couple of years, and I laid them out in the narrative. The first, I think, was to look at the goals that have been articulated, were articulated for Needham Center back in 2009, looking at the steps that have been completed, to try to get an understanding about whether or not there are some current regulatory constraints which are getting in the way of allowing that area to redevelop it at the rate that was anticipated at the time the 2009 plan was done. I mean, we have seen some development there. We've seen the building at 50 Dedham Avenue, which is the mixed-use building, certainly the hospital, the police fire station, and the mixed-use project that was done on Oak Street. But we haven't seen the degree of redevelopment that had been anticipated. And I think the 2020 initiative that was recently done identified some potential areas where the board might want to consider making adjustments to make it more economically feasible to secure redevelopment. One was looking at the parking requirement for multifamily housing for smaller units, and whether a portion of the parking demand could be assigned to commercial users. So that was one area the board, I think, is interested in exploring over the course of the next year or so. The other was the area I think I spoke with you, which is basically the business district, which exists along Highland Avenue between Rosemary and May Street. This is the last business district that remains in Needham from the original zoning framework. Beginning in 1989, the town began the process of looking at all of Needham, basically, all the commercial areas were zoned business, and the rules were the same. But beginning in 1989, the town began looking at the different areas that are commercially zoned. the uniqueness of them, the policy goals for those unique blocks, and has developed zoning that is particular to the area. So Needham Center was carved out initially, Chestnut Street was done, Highland Commercial 128 on the other side of 128 was done. Avery Square was created, I think in the early 90s. This block is the only block that wasn't addressed. And so the zoning program for that, the use tables and the dimensional tables, I think, need to be examined. So that's what the second piece, I think, addresses. And then the third piece I hadn't mentioned actually when we last met, and I should have, and that is that the town has embedded within it incentives to develop affordable housing at varying percentages. It's a function of the zoning district that you're in. The rules are not universal. In some districts it's set at 10%, and other districts it's set at 12.5%. And some districts don't trigger the affordable housing provision at all. So I think the town I think the board's interested in looking at inclusionary zoning generally across the town and developing a policy that is reflective of what the town's goals are townwide and updating that.
Great. Rick.
Lee, thank you. Help me understand. I can appreciate the fact that a warrant article exists so that money can be spent in multiple fiscal years. But if memory serves, when we talked last time, it was for those extraordinary things for which your department needed help to go outside to serve a particular need. As I read this letter, it seems to me that the stuff stated here is part and parcel the day in and day out stuff of planning. So question is, why isn't this in your operating budget? And why is it here?
Well, actually, that's a good question, because back when we first had this conversation in 2015, that's where I proposed to put it. And at that time, the thought process was, why don't we create more flexibility? Because the operational budget is happening over a fiscal year, and some of these projects are going over multiple fiscal years. So the idea was to create flexibility. We would do it through an article so that projects could go across fiscal years. And so that's the reason why I think the original appropriation was done in 2015 for the $45,000. And that money did last a number of years. It wasn't drawn down in a short period of time. So that was the thought process back then.
Dick.
Yeah, that's a sort of a follow-up to Rick's question. Same thing. It strikes me that this is part and parcel of what this committee does. Why do you need outside expertise? What's the outside expertise contribution going to be to the items you spelled out, the 3 items? What specialized knowledge is going to be necessary for the board to make its decisions in those areas?
In the case of the business district, for example, the board might need some information on a fiscal impact analysis. They may need some information on transportation. In terms of the downtown area, the board might also need some fiscal assistance and some information on parking demand in the downtown and recommendations from a transportation engineer as we look at ways of sharing parking across multiple uses.
I can see if you were doing special uses, but you need that expertise to just standardize zones.
Well, I think in the case of the business district, that block, we're probably going to be looking at policy issues. What should the land uses be? I mean, it's currently zoned for 3 stories. It has industrial uses embedded in it, in that block. I mean, does it make sense, for example, in that block to look at extending some of the zoning we have in Needham Center to accommodate more mixed use development? What would be the build out associated with those kinds of conversions? What would be the implications in terms of traffic and parking and fiscally? So I can see that looking at that particular block, it probably would be helpful to have some assistance in that area if depending upon how the policy questions and develop.
Okay.
Josh.
So the other part of the Finance Committee's request was to understand the timing of the requested funds, but that wasn't in the letter. So I'm curious, how long do you expect the $60,000 to last? And do you think that it would cover all of the initiatives that you outlined?
I think this would last a few years for us, and I think that it would cover all the initiatives that I have outlined.
Are there any other questions for Lee or Jean McKnight? No?
I have a motion.
Sure.
My motion is that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of Article 12, Planning Consultant Assistance for the amount of $60,000.
Do I have a second? Or discussion?
Discussion.
Jim?
I'm firmly against. As I mentioned at the prior meeting, I believe that these monies should best be spent when there is an identified project. I read through the memo, and I do not agree that we should be accepting the vision of the planning board or the vision of the Board of Selectmen. And I think that if they have an identified project that they need services for, it should come before the Finance Committee and ultimately before the taxpayers and town meeting to make a judgment as to whether or not they want to spend those monies towards that vision. I'm sure I'm in the minority on this, but that's my feeling.
Josh?
So I think last year in June, when we appropriated $60,000, I think there was an understanding that it was going to be used for several purposes and spent over several years, but it was spent on one study, I think, in less than a year. And so I think the original justification for having it in a separate warrant article was to spread it over several years, but that it doesn't seem to hold anymore. I think it makes more sense to review it as part of the budget request, so that a smaller amount can be attributed every year in the budget. And I do think that the planning board does need funds to be able to do some of these projects, but I think it makes more sense to put it there.
Okay, so going back to, let's just go through going back, do we have a second at all to John's motion, and then we can take a vote?
I'll second the motion.
You'll second John's motion. Let's just take a formal vote. Dick?
Yes, aye.
Tom?
Yes.
Rick?
No.
Jim?
No.
Josh?
No.
Louise? She's not back yet. And myself as the chair, I vote yes. So, did I
didn't think Barry and John voted, did they?
Oh, well, John,
No, I made the motion, but I haven't voted.
sorry.
So just because I make a motion doesn't mean I'm in favor of it. So my vote no.
Okay, Barry?
I vote yes.
4-4.
Someone needs to call Louise.
So,
I would suggest, Madam Chairman, that we just move to, we take it up whenever we have the full ninth member.
Makes sense to me.
fine, why don't we do that?
Ms. McKnight and Ms. Newman, I'll move you back to the attendees.
Do you expect Louise to rejoin, and should we be remaining? So this might be reopened at this meeting, or do you expect it will be taken up at another meeting, or exactly what?
I think it would be either taken up when Louise comes back or at another meeting. So,
okay. Well, you and I can communicate on whether we should remain available here. We can communicate offline on that.
Madam Chair, you might say for the record, Louise did indicate she was coming back tonight.
Yeah, she is coming back. She left. She's coming back. She had another commitment.
I see.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could we just not move this to the next meeting so both Lee and Jean don't have to stay here in the event that Louise comes back?
Yeah, we can do that. Why don't we move to take this up on the 7th?
Oh, she's here.
Oh,
She's back.
Oh, here is Louise. Wonderful.
The answer is?
Yeah, what's your vote?
What's your vote?
Everybody's laughing.
We're waiting for your vote.
We're waiting for your vote on Article 12. But
The planning consulting funds.
yes.
So we discussed this before. My concern had to do with the rapidity with which the funds were expended in the last few months and the amount that was being requested. And so was there a motion to approve or not approve? But
Well,
I want to know
Chair.
whether I have to vote yes or no.
I think we should tell her.
It is 4-4, so you're not in the dark.
It's 4.
Yeah,
Was the motion to approve?
Yes.
4-4.
Aye. And you're the breaking vote. Either way.
Nay, I do not vote to approve. I vote to not approve the article.
So, Madam Chair, just for clarity, maybe I should make another motion that the Finance Committee recommend against adoption of this article.
Second it.
I'm not sure we need it.
I don't think we need to do that because
I think-
we already voted down the recommended motion. So procedurally, do we need to do that?
I think we have to make enough, in order to put something in the warrant, I think we have to act on an affirmative vote, right?
I don't think that's accurate.
No, you can just put in that we voted not to, we
We
voted
just
not to
voted not to
recommend.
recommend this. Louise?
The warrant's already been printed, so just
Academic, huh?
Dave?
Dave?
And any votes that happen tonight, I can get them into the warrant before it's sent to the publisher
Okay.
tomorrow.
Great.
Either way, the recommendation will be the same.
Right,
The language is voted not to approve, right?
right.
Okay.
Okay, we voted not to approve this. Thank you.
Okay, so Lee and Jean, I'll move you to the attendees, and then I will move in Karis Lustig and Cecilia Semchek for the next articles, and they'll let me know if there's anybody else to attend.
Great.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karis, was there anyone else to come in?
I'm going to ask that if it's possible, myself and Cecilia will present, and if any specific follow-up questions would require one of our superintendents or other members of DPW to come in, that we bring them in on a case-by-case basis.
So the first is the Public Facilities Maintenance Program.
I believe we forwarded a list of projects that we are planning on doing with this funding source most of which are based off of the recently completed school master evaluation that was done. These are items that mostly affect the Pollard and the Mitchell School, as those schools, it's important to do the work sooner rather than later. So there's the most benefit for the students who are currently attending those schools, if the town does choose to move forward with any renovation work to those schools. And these are really to address deficiencies that were identified in that study. There are more deficiencies than are identified here. These are the ones that were deemed the highest priority by both the facilities, building maintenance department and the design and construction department.
John.
I had two questions on the chart, and they had to do with town hall clock repair for $83,000 and the Needham High School cupola repair for $75,000. Both of which buildings are, I think, right about at 10 years or so. I'm just going to use that as a number from when they were finished. And my question is, are these construction deficiencies, that was something wrong with the construction that took place? Or was it that there was some sort of outside force that damaged these and it caused the repair? Or is it due to missing out on maintenance of these two? It seems, both of those items struck me as, I can't figure out why repairs 10 years out from those buildings of that magnitude would be necessary, and I'd like to know the causes.
I believe I can start with the town hall clock. We have been consulting with the designer on that project to see what the issue is. And there are some restoration items that are being done that we think are one-time items as part of this. And the reason why the facade ended up deteriorating faster than they had anticipated, they could not pinpoint a specific reason. I do know that just getting equipment up to these particular locations is very expensive. So even maintenance is a fairly high cost just to get the equipment up to perform that maintenance. But on the cupola, I'm going to have to defer to the building maintenance director if Barry Dulong is available as to why that particular item also came up. But I do know that there has been significant kind of aesthetic deterioration to the cupola that needs to be addressed.
Okay. Any other question? Josh.
So I had a question about the duct cleaning at Elliott, the library, and Hillside. Is this related to COVID? And if so, it's not related to COVID? And then I guess the second is specifically with regards to Hillside, is that in anticipation that it'll be occupied, or is that regardless of its occupancy?
Sorry, I'm trying to just also grab Barry. We have a normal duct cleaning process that we go through with all of our buildings on a 5-year rotating schedule. This actually started when we had the HVAC failure at the Newman 13 years ago, I believe. And we have it on a 5-year rotating cycle. These are the 3 buildings that are currently up this year. We do this work, we actually started doing it on 3rd shift the last few years over the summer, because in non-COVID years, we have so much demand for programming or maintenance work over the summer that having the buildings shut down in order to do the duct cleaning work, which is what you would need, really wasn't an option. So we do the work now on 3rd shift when the buildings aren't occupied. So regardless of whether or not the buildings are occupied, the work will happen this summer.
Louise.
So I have a question about the $262,000 of unscheduled urgent repairs. These are not funds that, if they're unexpended, get returned back, especially not if they're so broadly described. So from year to year, these funds carry over, and we have a reserve fund of $2 million. So if there are unexpected emergency repairs, it seems to me those should be addressed through the reserve fund. So I would like to understand better what that 262 is and why we're building a contingency into a warrant article.
So historically, there has been that factored into the facility maintenance warrant article as we've submitted it. So that's not a new addition this year. The types of projects that we've run into as a result, and I'll say that there's a larger list of projects out there that can be accomplished. One of the reasons we reserve a portion of those funds throughout the year is because if we have a major HVAC issue, we've had cracked boilers. I know at the Elliott before, those are sizable repairs, around $50,000 or more dollars. And so we've utilized those funds to address those issues as they've come up. If those issues haven't come up, we've utilized those funds to identify or deal with more cosmetic issues that might not be as high of a priority.
Dick?
Are these actions going to be done by outside personnel, or is this all of them, or are some of them being done internally? If they're being done internally, why isn't that part of your budget?
So all of this work is going to be contracted out to outside vendors. We have a whole host of other projects that we'll be doing internally, utilizing our staff over the summer.
And isn't the reason for it being a warrant article that these projects don't fit neatly within a fiscal year?
Yeah, so the problem is our construction process starts as soon as school ends, which is like, usually the middle of June. And then ends when probably about 2 weeks before schools reopen, when teachers return. So that does overlap from one fiscal year to the other.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
So in essence, you are creating a reserve fund.
For the contingency within the warrant article.
Yes. Okay, well, I don't think we need multiple reserve funds.
John?
Yeah, I think following up on Louise's point and Jim's point, which both I think are valid, I think it would be good to have not only this report that you're looking ahead, but to see what was done last year and the year before. And so there's a way of tracking, and I'm sure you do it, but it would be good to share that with us. So for example, when we're sitting here a year from now, hopefully in person and not through Zoom, we can go back at this and say what that 262 was actually spent on. I'm not so much ready to jump at it right now, but if we get to next year and we see what that 262 was or wasn't spent on, I might look at it differently then. I don't think I have enough of a history to make that decision now. I'm willing to give you not that I need to give you the benefit of the doubt, but willing to have it in there for now. But with the request that going forward, we not only get a snapshot of what you're planning, but what your past year was, so we can measure what was done versus what you're saying you're going to do.
Yeah, and we have provided that in the past, and we can certainly provide that information as well. I would also indicate, particularly for summer work, having some flexibility over the summer with demands from building managers for expectations that they have for the maintenance of their building, as well as items that might come up over the summer, is certainly helpful as we manage our project load. But I'll provide you the historical work that we've done with that article. And I can actually even flag what was part of the intended expenditures that were there, and then what was done as part of the additional expenditures that came up over the period of that year.
Because 25, just using unscheduled urgent repairs, and whether you use that as a term or call it contingency, it's 25% of what you're asking here for, and not to have it specified, it raises the questions that we're all asking. And so I would encourage you to get ahead of it so that next year we can see exactly that it is being put to the purpose for which it's being stated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Barry?
But just to clarify, Karis, and by the way, congratulations formally. I don't know if we've had a chance to see you since you were officially named as DPW director. That's great and awesome. I'm happy for you. But has there been a carryover from year to year that you have used? Is there a current balance you started out with before coming up with this $1 million?
There has been a small amount of carryover from year to year, but it gets expended very quickly in the following year. There is no balance currently out of this fund, as we've expended all of the funds on mostly on HVAC work in preparation of getting the schools reopened this year. So in fact, most of the work that was originally on our schedule for last fiscal year ended up getting pushed aside, and we ended up utilizing the majority of the funds to get the schools ready for the reopening this year.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the 262. From my perspective, the 262, while I would like it to be accounted for and for us to see it from year to year, the contingency number, $262,000 does not seem like a very big number for a town that has hundreds of millions of dollars of buildings to address. So I'm not concerned about the amount. I would like to see it annually, what we did spend, and the unscheduled amount. So I think for the department's flexibility and speed of responding to needs, this doesn't scare me at all. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Jim?
Tom, I understand your point, and I do understand math. But I got to tell you, this is a sore spot for me, because you could make that argument about anything in the budget that is less than $500,000. You could say this is a mere pittance. This is a small percentage, and so I don't look at it that way. I think we have to look at everything. If it's 60,000, 50,000, 100,000, 120,000, 270,000. Yes, is it a mere pittance? You're right. But if we didn't object to any of this stuff, well, then I don't know why we would be here. So
no, I'm not suggesting we should. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
No, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't debate it, but I'm just saying the amount. While I would like to see follow up, as I said, I think we should see that. I think it makes this number, and yes, Jim, we could say that about anything, but we are talking about a town that has literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So the amount is not overwhelming in my position, in my view, and we will look at it. I think that we made that clear to Karis.
Yeah. Dick?
Karis, do I recall that this is an increased number over numbers we've used last year, and the experience was last year there are a number of projects that your department couldn't get to because of the school COVID related needs, and so you basically, I'm gonna, my term, not yours, spitballed a number, said we're gonna take what I think was a $700,000 last year, and we're gonna bump it up to $1 million because we're gonna need catch up. Is that a fair summary? My term, not yours, of with the spitball?
That's certainly one of the issues. I think duct cleaning is an example of that, where we're doing, I think we usually don't do 3 buildings in 1 year, but we are this year because we did not do one of them last year. I also think it's that issue in conjunction with the school master plan coming out with recommendations that need to be evaluated, and a very short turnaround time between that being issued and our budget requests and process. So all of those issues currently are being vetted out. We're meeting with, we as in building maintenance is meeting with design and construction on a bi-weekly basis to go through those recommendations. We've only gotten through the Mitchell and the Pollard so far. There are recommendations in other schools that do need to be addressed as well. So those will be more fully vetted in the next few months as well.
Yeah, I think we would have been more comfortable if you could have said the balances for projects such as A, B, C, D, E identified, rather than just throwing, because I think you do that on the roads. And so there's another article coming up saying, unless conditions warrant otherwise, we expect to spend it on the following items.
I think that's a great point, Dick. I do.
Any further discussion on this? So are we ready to vote on this or need additional information or take it up
Let's
next?
find out. I move that we approve. Whichever article this is.
Article 9.
Facilities Maintenance warrant article.
Second.
Okay. Vote. Rick,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Jim,
No.
Louise. You're muted. Muted.
Yes.
Yes, you voted yes, or yes, you knew you were muted. Sorry.
Yes, I voted yes. I did not know I was muted. I voted yes.
Dick?
I am just failing today.
Sorry. Barry?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So, thank you. Article 23. Expand for public ways. Expend for public ways, excuse me.
So this is a recurring annual request that is associated with accepting our town's allocation of Chapter 90 funds. This is approximately the last year of funding that is required for the town to pursue its plan to do the renovation of the downtown and what they're calling phase 2, which is to do segments of the downtown that would connect the signalized intersections we've already done down to Pickering Street and down to Garden Street on the other side. We are currently in the design process. We had initially planned on doing the work or starting this work sometime this summer, but due to COVID, we have decided to postpone the work till the summer of 2020. We don't want to do anything that would disrupt the businesses, particularly for outdoor dining. And given that we're doing work in areas where they're currently doing outdoor dining in the street, we decided to postpone the work a year.
And
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Josh.
Oh, I have a question. Do we know what the funds, how much the monies we're going to receive from the state are?
The allocation is level dollar with last year. That's what the state has indicated so far. So about $1 million.
Okay.
Louise.
Can I just ask a question? So, does that mean that you're reserving the funds? We're not going to spend the funds this year. We're just going to set them aside, or yes? So,
Yes, so we've been reserving funds for several years in order to accomplish the project in the downtown.
So can I ask what the relationship is to another warrant article request for the design of the town common?
It was the town common.
So they're two separate projects in two separate locations. So the common is standalone, and then this project basically connects the corner of Dedham and Great Plain down to Pickering. And then on the other side of that intersection, so Chestnut and Great Plain down to, I believe it's Garden. So sort of, they call it the innie and the outie approach. I guess that's the way the engineers have been talking about it. And the innie was phase 1, which is the area around the common that was done, I think 3 years ago. And then this next section is working out from the common down Great Plain Ave.
But these funds can't be used for the common itself, just the roads.
No, they won't be, it won't be connected to the common project.
So it's strictly roads and signaling.
Road signaling, markings, amenities, street trees, and sidewalks.
Okay. Jim.
If the intent is to collect and gather funds to be spent down the road, I have no objection to that.
And I'll make a motion to approve Article 23, expend state funds for public ways.
Second.
Do I have a second? Is there a second? Tom. Okay. Let's take a voice vote. Rick?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Thank you. And then Article 31, which is Walker Pond improvements.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Karis, is that sediment or is that polluted material in the bottom of Walker Pond?
And I'd have to bring Tony in for exact clarification, but I believe it's organic material in Walker Pond that's due with the high nutrient load in Walker Pond.
So is it toxic to humans, or it just is going to make the thing unpleasant? And
I'm more on the unpleasant side. It's not one of the, it's not on our NIPD's category 5 contaminated bodies, and even that isn't about polluted with chemicals. It's polluted with phosphorus and nitrogen and those other items.
Gotcha. So it's not polluted material. Okay. Madam Chair, do we need to wait until the CPC takes a vote on this before?
They moved it from, it's not a CPC article any longer.
They took it out. Okay.
Yeah. So we can take a vote on it
Okay.
if there's no further questions or discussion.
Just, will we get credit on our NIPD's permit? On our
Yeah, anything we do to clean up, we'll get credit for. So this is all about cleaning up the inputs, which is why CPC decided not to pursue it.
Okay.
But it will clean up inputs, which we will of course take credit for NIPD's.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that the Finance Committee vote to approve Article 1.
I second.
31.
31.
And Rick, you second it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So, Madam Chair, in the draft warrant I have, this is listed as Article 34.
Yeah, I think it's changed.
It's changed in the
I think 34 is accurate.
What will be in the printed warrant?
Yeah.
Got it.
So, getting back to the vote. Barry,
Yes. Sorry.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jim. Jim? Did you
Yes.
say yes? Sorry. Louise?
Yes.
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. Okay. General cash capital.
So we have several items within this article. The first we have is the Hillside boiler project, and this is a design of the Hillside boiler. Right now, the two boilers that are over at the Hillside have quite a bit of age. Initially, 10 years ago, when we were looking at this building and how to keep it going in its duration, there was a belief that this building would be coming down as part of a renovation project, which, you know, the town was able to purchase additional land and build a new school at a new location. So the long-term investment in the heating system at the Hillside School was not a priority at that time. We are looking at doing a program where we would replace one of the two boilers at the Hillside. We run a redundant system. Basically, we can't get parts anymore to fix this boiler. So what we would do is cannibalize the existing boiler and install a new one. We had hoped to do something more energy efficient and connect it to natural gas. But as you know, that particular area is sensitive and we don't have gas at that location. So we will be trying to find the most efficient boiler that we can that runs on oil.
And that's the only.
And this is in anticipation, well, it's currently being used by the police department, correct? And
right.
And anticipated to be used for other swing space. I would assume that's.
Okay. Any other questions on this for Karis?
Yeah, there are a whole number of article items on this thing. It's not just one item. It's a
But even with
$4
respect
million
to the,
number here.
yeah, but even with respect to the boiler, so what is the long-term plan for this building?
It's a good question.
Because
it's
this
my
is for the design of boilers, which presumably following design comes construction.
I will say that we did not have heat for a portion of this winter. Providing heat in that building is a challenge currently. So it's more about the preservation of the building for this year and next year than necessarily the long-term preservation. But
this doesn't give you that. It just gives you a design.
With the intent of constructing next year.
And do you know the cost of that construction?
We have an estimate. I don't have it off. I have it in the capital plan because it's in the out year. If you hold on one second.
But we don't even know if we may raise the buildings and construct something new there. So I don't know why. This is what we hearken back to the conversation we had last week when we were told that the planning board had set forth certain requirements with respect to the return of the site once the public safety was gone. And I said, return of the site. I mean, no one wants to return to the site. So I guess I kind of question the same thing Louise is saying, which is, well, what is the long-term use? And if there's no long-term use, we shouldn't put long-term money into it.
Although after our Emery Grover discussion last week, we may be using it.
Well, and Barry, if that's true, I don't have a problem with that. But then let's come out and say it, and then that's the plan.
Madam Chair, if I may, the CPI suggests that the cost of assuming they conclude to replace the boiler, the cost for the boiler next time will be $235,000. And I think the theory here is, as I read it, that there are only two boilers here, and one of them, the one in question, is already showing problems. There's no way to repair it. And if the other one goes down, they don't have any confidence that this one will support heat in the building, and going through an extended period of time with no heat in the building will be inconsistent with the potential for using it. That's the argument.
Except that this doesn't get you that. So the $16,000 basically gets you nothing for the next year, other than a piece of paper.
Yeah, that's my question is, why are we breaking it up? Why can't you design it and build it in the same year? It doesn't seem like it needs to be split up, but that you should be going forward with your goal being to get whoever the engineer who's going to spec it, and then the purchase and installation of it done in 1 year. It makes no sense to me to put it over 2 years.
So Cecilia Simchak, who pays great attention to these things, did provide me, it's $235,000 is the estimate for the boiler. And I will say both boilers are not in good shape. It's not just one of them is in poor shape. It's just that we can't get the supplies. It's very difficult for us to get the supplies to even fix it because of how old the system is, and that they're not readily available. So the idea is we'd cannibalize one to fix the other. And we did clarify in our capital that we may request construction funds in the fall of the fall town meeting, depending on how the design comes out and how urgent the repairs are needed.
Okay. Should we move down the rest of these?
Can I just stay on this? It would seem to me that the DPW could find $16,000 in its budget to do the initial look at this thing, and then come back in the fall if that look at it suggests you need a new boiler, then put it on fall. But I'm very sympathetic with John's approach, John's question. Let's put it that way.
Dave.
In fairness to DPW, the tradition in Needham has been to fund design, and then once you have a better sense of what's going to be constructed, then the funding request for the construction. And that's been the mantra that I always say to departments when they submit the request. Certainly the DPW would have preferred to have a one warrant article to fund it all, but it's from the guidance that I provided to them, you're seeing it in two parts. The other piece to that is DPW funding the design within their operating budget. They can certainly do that, but I do know the Finance Committee doesn't like surprises of something being funded outside of transparency. In other words, a financial warrant article that could commit the town to spending a few $100,000. So again, that's why it's in the being requested as a financial warrant article, both of them based upon past tradition.
Jim.
Dave, you're right. But I don't agree with you. I think you're right. We don't like surprises and we do like design before construction. But in this particular circumstance, there's always one-offs. There's always challenges and different things. And I think John's right. And I think this is a circumstance where it probably makes sense to look at the total cost of the project, especially when we don't even really know what the long-term use of the building will be.
Okay. Shall we continue going down the list? And I think for Kara's, this is the only other thing only one she needed to be on for. Is that right?
I also had the infrastructure and the water and the sewer capital.
Okay. So, Dick.
Yep. Madam Chair, can I point out a very substantial item is the Ridge Hill building demolition. And that's a $650,000 number. It might be interesting to note that in the CPI, that number was $885,000. I chatted with Dave about it earlier today, and he and the town manager used persuasion on the DPW and others who had proposed the $885,000 number, and it came in at $650,000. But this is an item that's likely to generate a fair amount of discussion at the town meeting, so I think it's appropriate for us to have a clear understanding of why the demolition cost of the building in question is a $650,000 number.
Yeah. Dave.
And it's actually building design and construction that's taking the lead on this, not public works.
Excuse me.
And it's associated with a lot of uncertainties with the Ridge Hill facility and hazardous materials, what hazardous materials will be there and what underground surprises that they would have. Our concern was they were being overly cautious in terms of those costs when they came up with the initial 885,000. So there was some ground testing, checking for underground tanks and such, and the number of tanks is less, which helped contribute to the lower cost, to lower estimated cost for the demolition.
John.
Yeah, is there a, and I don't know, Dave, if you're the proponent of this particular aspect, this item within the warrant article, but is there like a life safety reason why we're taking the building down at this point? Because the normal procedure is you take down, if as part of building something new or building in its place, you can achieve an economy of scales with cost by doing it at that point in time. And you don't then have to sort of cap it and do other types of things by raising it. So my question is there a specific life safety issue that's requiring it be taken down, and or is it just we want to take it down?
There is a broader plan which the select board is looking at in terms of the reuse of the site. But the primary reason we're looking to take it down now is the public nuisance of it. It is a building in bad condition. It is a building that attracts people that should not enter it, and that's a concern that we have. And that's the primary reason. So it's the public nuisance, and which I guess you can say by extension, life safety.
Josh.
So I walk around Ridge Hill in that area, and I guess the buildings are in poor shape, but I guess I don't see the nuisance aspect. I mean, I even don't see, evidence that people go inside. It's hard for me to see why we should be spending money to demolish the building without having a plan on what we're going to do afterwards.
Okay.
Have we looked at other options for minimizing the exposure from public nuisance, like totally boarding up the reasonable access points so that people really can't get in there?
Well, certainly, I mean, we have an alarm system in there, and of course we have checks of the facility, but you don't have, but it's easier not having the building there at all than to have the concern of a building that's off the beaten path. Perhaps it would be different if it was on a major road that you can better secure it, but it is off the beaten path. And those are the concerns. It's also concerns that our insurance company has mentioned in terms of our risk assessment of properties of the town.
A lot of money.
Fortunately, none of us have high school kids, so we really don't have a good perspective here.
Right.
For what it's worth, the Exchange Club stores all of their 4th of July equipment in that space. It has ever since they replaced the old Memorial Field House with a new one. Given COVID, we just haven't had a chance to move all of our stuff back. But I go in there frequently because of that, and we have not lost anything. So none of our material that's been stored there has been stolen. This is a data point.
Put our fireworks in there and kill two birds with one stone.
Can I ask about a different item?
Sure.
Energy efficiency upgrades. So I know that every year we do energy efficiency upgrades. I think that we should revise the description this year. I don't think that we should assume that we're going to be operating systems at the COVID level for any extended period of time. And the governor today just signed the climate bill. So we're actually going to have to go in the other direction. So I think that, while I agree we should do energy efficiency upgrades every year, I'm just suggesting that that particular write-up be edited so that we do have flexibility in terms of what we're doing and don't assume air exchanges at whatever we have. What do we have? 6, 9? We have ridiculously high.
We have 4 in I think 2 is actually. So
yeah,
actually,
exactly, right.
it may be the way that we wrote the language. And so the intent of this is actually to reintroduce our HVAC energy efficiency programming back into the buildings.
Yep.
So it's taking all of the work that we did to increase the airflow, which is not very energy efficient, and then revert it back to the intended usage in these buildings of air efficiency. Beforehand, we'd been looking at doing, oh goodness, Cecilia, now the word completely escapes me. We've been doing a reevaluation, retro commissioning of all of the HVAC systems in town. That sort of happened as a result of COVID, because we had to look at every single design and every single building in a really granular way. So instead of doing these retro commissions piece by piece, we kind of did it all in one big chunk, but we did it to this new 4 air change per hour standard. And this would be returning it back to the ASHRAE standard and to the original design that this equipment was intended for. So that is the intention. It just could be the way it was written.
Yeah, I think I would just revise that a little bit, the language, to make that clear.
Can I ask about the RTS?
Yeah.
Movement? And also the Pollard study, just a little bit elaboration on both.
So the Pollard study is a school submission, and it may be a school submission with the design and construction division.
Okay.
The property improvements, we're currently actually doing stormwater work on 2 different areas that are identified at the RTS for improved stormwater treatment and management over at that facility. That work is going to be starting in the next few weeks. You'll see it when you're down there at the RTS. This work is the next phase in that project, which is to pave the road that goes from the main RTS facility into the salt shed. Currently, it is a dirt road, which functionally is problematic for the RTS in the winter when we're trying to get salt deliveries into that shed. And also from a stormwater perspective, there's runoff that we have currently into the areas around the RTS that come from that road. So we'll be regrading, reshaping that road to move stormwater into these new basins that will have recently constructed.
And Barry, your question on Pollard was?
What the specific projects are that they're looking for design funds for.
I'd have to defer that to the school department.
Okay.
The write-up suggests that this is part of the concept of converting the modular things into more permanent classroom space, and the whole question of reconfiguring that into a 7 through 9 and changing around.
I know, but there's also a bigger plan for Pollard thought about as part of this master plan. I'm not sure how this fits with that. I guess I just want to understand how it.
There's a pretty good write-up of it in the CPI. If those of you have it with you, it's on page 80, 3-80, and it's that complements the projects proposed as part of a multi-project strategic plan, provide capacity at the elementary schools. High Rock as elementary school, Pollard first accelerated, so forth, and it's a multi-school reconfiguration. Is that a fair characterization, Karis? Or are you pleading the fifth on this one?
I apologize. I really haven't honestly been involved in these conversations. It's been between the school department and design and construction.
So I think that we should try to get our questions, Barry, your questions answered from the school committee. I mean, I don't think we can address this right now. Josh.
I had a question about the public safety mobile devices. In the write-up, it said that these laptops are replaced every 6 years, but I noticed that we appropriated $35,000 at the 2019 annual town meeting for that. So I'm wondering why some of these only lasted 2 years.
They're not all being replaced at the same time. There's a certain number that get replaced each year, and just the rotating.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, on the message boards, the write-up says the plan is to Fund one message board per year. I was just curious as to how many message boards we're looking at and where would they be located?
So we installed one message board. I think it was about 5 years ago that first one went in at the RTS, which has been pretty successful. I will say there are a lot of requests that we have to use our portable message boards. And oftentimes there's a conflict between using our message boards for construction, which is really what we purchased them for, and then using them to communicate community-wide events. So the intention of these permanent message boards is to have those community-wide events areas to promote those. There are, I want to say there's 4 or 5 different locations that are identified in our capital submission that we could end up putting these boards in. I know one of those locations is also the fire station number 2, and I believe there's still conversations about including that as part of that project. So that's I believe it's 4 or 5 boards, and the intention is really to do it at entrance points to the town, so people would see information as they're coming in.
Thank you.
Jim.
I'm sure I'm number 1 out of 1 million in terms of minority, but those message boards look like a trailer park.
Yeah,
They look awful. So, I mean,
Not only that, but they're unsafe. They distract people.
yeah, I think they're awful too. Hate them. And the
so
one
I guess we're 3 out of 1 million.
and the one at the DPW with those awful colors. Shades of peacock blue and
You mean the RTS?
yeah.
Kind of like that one, actually.
You do?
I mean, actually, the boards are good. I just don't know how many we're looking at, and they're going to be all over town. How many years out we're looking?
So,
Go ahead.
does everybody feel like their questions are answered on general fund cash capital? I mean, I don't think we can vote this, but
I think we need more on the Ridge Hill.
I
project.
agree.
And
And-
definitely more on the schools.
And definitely more on the schools before we can.
Yep.
All right, let's move to Article 36, Public Works Infrastructure.
So this is the multi-project infrastructure article that we submit on an annual basis. The plan for the past few years has essentially been to level fund the sidewalk and road work with an inflator on an annual basis, and then look at the other projects as identified that are included as part of that article. So in this case, the additional projects, in addition to our targeted miles for streets and sidewalks, is a traffic signal intersection improvement at West at Highland. And that would be changing the traffic signals and some of the markings at that particular intersection. And we'd be targeting storm drain work at Concord and Burnside, which is work that was identified during some large flooding that we had in 2013 about storm drain capacity. And the other item that would be coming up is an evaluation of our Brooks and Culverts program. We have used this article before to do segments of work on our brooks, and what we're finding is that the segments that we're doing are small, that were behind the deterioration of our brooks and culverts. So we are looking to develop a financial plan to renovate our brooks and culverts and maintain them, to determine how much funding to seek in order to make sure that we're keeping on top of those projects. The streets and sidewalks projects, our plan for work this summer is work at Sunset and Cefalo for paving and sidewalk, work at Oak Street from Maple Street to Mark Tree Road for paving and sidewalk. We do have a competing utility project that's happening there, so that may be delayed by some portion of time to allow Eversource Gas to come in and do their work. We'd be looking at Maple Street, Oak Street to the dead end for paving, Willow Street paving, and then we're looking at portions of Central Ave, Taylor Street for paving and sidewalk, portions of Greendale Ave, Hamlin Lane, and those would be work that would be done under our infrastructure article this summer.
Louise?
Where are we with expenditures of previously appropriated funds?
I know we have nothing that's currently open that's more than a year old. So we have, and Cecilia can correct me if I'm wrong, I know we don't have any 19 funding, fiscal 19 funding. We have no 20 funding, and then I think a small portion of 21's funding.
Okay.
We have no 21, we have some 20. We didn't get funded for the infrastructure article in 21.
Correct, so we're behind a year as far as funding.
But you don't have anything backed up. You're out of funding right now. Okay.
Madam Chair, I propose that the Finance Committee approve Article 36, Public Works Infrastructure.
Second.
Whatever that article is now, numbered.
Second.
Okay. Let's take a voice vote. Rick?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Louise?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay. So Article 38, Sewer Enterprise Fund Cash Capital. In your warrant, it's Article 39.
Article 38.
Yes. Sewer Enterprise Fund Cash Capital.
Madam Chair, it's a single item. It's part of the fleet program, and it's for the replacement of the large dump that is used by the sewer department. There were 3 vehicles scheduled to be replaced, funded this year, but we can only afford to replace one of them. This is the highest priority of the 3.
Questions?
And we're paying cash for this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'll move that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of Article Sewer Enterprise Fund Cash Capital.
Second.
Great. Let's take a vote. Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Louise?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Article 39, which is Article 40 in the warrant before you, is appropriate for sewer main replacement.
So we had an article, I believe it was the year before last, to look at the Greendale Ave sewer main interceptor. We knew that there was an issue in this interceptor, and we were looking for solutions whether or not we would reline or replace this pipe. As part of that project, we CCTV'd the pipe and found a blockage that we cannot continue to investigate. So this particular article is to fund the removal of that blockage.
And have we expended all the funds that MWRA has made available to us? Dave has his hand up.
Yes, no, we haven't, and that was one of the reasons we're looking to fund it by debt, is the hope that we'll be able to access some of those funds.
Okay, because they do sunset if they're not used.
That's correct. And the other part is this will lead into an additional $2 million appropriation next year.
All
So
right.
I do want to just, $2 million is the worst case scenario if we need to replace the pipe. If we can reline the pipe, then it will be less than that amount.
It's still a 0% interest loan, right?
Yes, and the $2 million worst case scenario would be by debt, also looking to access the MWRA.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Does anyone know Fred Lasky?
Should I ask for the full 2 million? Oh, all right.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, I move that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of appropriate for sewer main replacement.
Second,
Great. Voice vote, Rick,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Dick,
yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Okay, great. And myself, yes. Pass. And Article 40, Water Enterprise Fund, cash capital.
So I can speak to the first two items, and I'm sure if Dave could speak to the fleet item as part of the comprehensive fleet program. The first item is funding the construction of a previously approved design project for the Rosemary water main. There is a water main that goes underneath Rosemary. This would be to replace it with a water main that goes within the road. We did the design and now we're looking for funds for construction.
Rick?
Just a question, Karis. Why wasn't this done when Rosemary Lake was drained a couple of years ago? Did we not know that the thing was leaking, or why couldn't we do it then?
So we're not certain that the thing is leaking. The issue is that if it does leak, we have no way of identifying that it is leaking. No easy way of identifying that it is leaking. The reason that we didn't do it when we did the draining of the lake is because we don't need to remove the existing pipe. So there's no need to drain it again. We'll just be replacing it with pipe in the road. And I imagine, and I can confirm with our engineer, we would be abandoning the existing pipe where it is.
Thank you.
Karis, that's not what the write-up says.
Mm-hmm.
Write-up says it's the 8-inch water main under the lake will be removed and relocated.
I will confirm. I believe they mean it will be removed from service, but I will confirm that we're not removing it from the actual
and relocated.
water bed.
It's an intellectual relocation, or
It's actually going to be used to replace the other water main that we just voted on. Sorry, Karis, it's late.
I think that write-up probably needs to be clarified.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we move on this? We need to get clarification on that one, change that. So let's just move to Article 41.
Madam Chair, Mr. Davison is trying to get
Oh, sorry.
Just for clarification, you're correct. The Finance Committee needs clarification what is actually happening. But what's written in the warrant, that it's too late. I mean, all I can do is get the votes in, the documents finished and ready for the.
But our votes aren't in. We missed the deadline.
Oh, no, Louise, you missed that part. So our votes, Dave is putting in. We can put in the votes.
Oh,
If you
today.
vote this evening, I'll be emailing Sandy Sincotter.
Ah, okay.
On that item, I just got a text from Tony, who is listening in, and he has confirmed that it is removed from service, not removed from the bed of the pond.
Good. Madam Chair, do you need a motion?
Yes.
I move that.
Wait, Josh, I'm sorry. Did you have a question? Did Josh have a question first?
Well, do we want to discuss the other items in the cash capital article?
Sure, yeah.
The next item is a new item, and it has to do with designing the replacement of a water main on South Street. We've had a significant breakage history for emergency work on South Street, and it's similar issues that we're finding with the joins down the line in that water main. So we are looking at designing and constructing a replacement water main on South Street. This would be the first step that we would be taking in that process.
right after Eversource is finished of the
Yeah.
last year and a half. We're going to dig it up again.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Is this for design funds? Is there an estimate yet on how much the construction would cost?
There is. We did submit an amount in the capital. It's 2.9 million.
And the write-up says it's between Charles River and Chestnut, so maybe it's not related to Eversource.
I just know that in front of my house, they've been digging up the street for years. It doesn't look like it's going to end, so. Did anybody else have a question on this? Okay, and then the last item was the fleet replacement program.
Yes, Madam Chair. It's they're the same 3 vehicles that were discussed with the committee when I gave the overview of all the fleet. And they are all scheduled for replacement and are in need of replacement. It's a Ford F-350, a Ford F-450, and a Ford F-550 that are all will be taken out of service. They're 2012s, and they'll be replaced with 2021s or 22s, depending how quickly the procurement goes.
And that's just a typical 10-year cycle. Is that what you get out of them?
Yes.
Any other questions? So do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll move to recommend adoption of this article by the Finance Committee, water service connections.
No, water enterprise.
I'm sorry, water enterprise from cash capital.
Second.
Screw me up.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Great. Voice vote, Dick,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
myself, yes. Okay, and finally, water service connections, which is Article 41 and 42 in the warrant that you have in front of you.
So this is a program that has evolved into essentially a lead service replacement program for Public Works. We had submitted on an annual basis a smaller amount, and actually based on a recommendation of the Finance Committee, had consolidated multiple years of work into one warrant request so that we could leverage additional funding from other sources. I think it's the MWRA. We have expended all the funds that were allocated, I think 4 years ago, and we're now seeking additional funds to continue this work moving forward. We have about 800 services that are left in the town of Needham that are primarily they're goosenecks that are lead, and a few services that are full lead that we're currently pursuing for removal from our water system. And this would continue that work for the next several years. It took us about 3 years to expend the funds that were allocated before.
And if you have 800 remaining, how many more, how much more will that be?
Our last bid that we had in 2016, the cost of a partial removal was about $3,000 and the cost of a full removal was about $45,000. So at that lower amount, we'll be seeking funds for probably at least 2 more cycles of funding in order to finish up the lead replacement work.
Okay, Dick?
Karis, could you explain the advantage of asking for a larger amount at this point? You said there's some sort of leverage in funding from other sources. Could you elaborate on that?
So I think Dave could certainly speak to it better than I do, but I believe there is funding sources from the MWRA that we're able to utilize in order to either finance this or seek reimbursement. So I'm going to defer that to Dave.
Dave?
Similar to what we were discussing on the sewer articles, this is a borrowing which we could lock into low financing and perhaps grants.
And by asking for more, that increases our ability to get it, or what? Why does the asking for more advantage us in that program?
If we can access the funds at the low interest or grants, it's best to get the 5 years of funding together rather than 200,000 each year, because the program could be sunset.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This doesn't affect how it gets spent. It's just, or when it gets spent. Correct? Just you will have access to the money and you'll spend it as you would have.
Correct. And there's only so much work that we're able to undertake in a given year as well. So it doesn't impact that as long as we communicate with Dave when we're doing work and how much to borrow.
Dick?
I guess if we thought we were going to have 2 or 3, at least 2 more of these installations, why didn't we go for more? Under Dave's theory that if the program's going to go away, why not go for 2 million if we're going to come back and ask for another million down the road?
I was basing it on a 5-year window in terms of coming up with an amount, because you could, to your point, it could be millions of dollars. You know, let's look at a reason. Well, the last time we did this, we took the same approach. And it was $1 million authorization.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Are we ready to vote on this one?
Madam Chair, I move that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of what is presented as Article 41, Water Service Connections.
Second, anyone?
Second it.
Right. Voice vote. Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
And Jim and Louise, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jim and Louise. It's
Yes.
like,
I should talk more. You might remember I'm here.
it's,
Oh, geez.
you're so quiet, Jim.
Maybe they should be known as Thelma and Louise.
All right. Karis, thank you. Cecilia, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. I know it's late. So just the last thing I wanted to mention, and thank you, and Rick, we got this in under your 10 o'clock meeting, so I hope that's it still works for you. But I just wanted to give you an update, and Barry and John can chime in just on our, we had a school liaisons meeting with the school committee and Dan Gutenkantz earlier this week to just give him our initial impression on Emery Grover, which he didn't really need because he listened to last week's meeting. And so I think he was, fair to say, dismayed is probably the wrong word, but at our need to urge the parties that be to further discuss Emery Grover, not in a silo, but in the context of a post-COVID world, and how to best utilize the space for school administration and where it should reside, and the ability to potentially lease space on a short-term basis. And most importantly, and Dave, you can speak to this, we are all waiting to look at the school financing plan that Dave is working very hard on and should be completed late April. Is that right?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So I think it's going to be difficult to make a decision on this prior to town meeting. So that's where we're at so far. John, would you add anything to that?
No, I think it was the pushback we received was that they felt that Emery Grover has been studied and studied and restudied and restudied again. And I think we're resistant to being asked to look at it again. And our response to that was, we're not saying it hasn't been looked at, but it hasn't been looked at in two ways. One, in a post-COVID world, and then two, in sort of, other than in a silo, but looking at it sort of comprehensively with all what we have in front of us over the next 5 to 10 years. And we were urged not to take a vote on it yet. And I think if I looked at our schedule, we're not going to do it until 2 weeks. So there's time if someone on there and wants to come back with us on something different or more, we said we'd give them that opportunity.
Yeah, and I don't think he has, I did talk to Dan again today. I don't think he has really an issue. Realize it's going to take some time to really understand how this fits with everything else that needs to be done. And if it means obviously punting this to the fall, I think that's something they're prepared for.
Right.
It's interesting. I was reading something that we received, and it talked about what rental prices would be, and I was taken a little bit back. That the area here is $45 a square foot, and that's not unreasonable. However, in a post-COVID world, in December, I just signed a lease for downtown Boston for 5 years, taking in the sublease, and my rent there is $40 a square foot with 3 months free rent, and they were going to modify this space to my liking. Now, which I found it really strange that when they sent out what it costs to rent here, it was still that amount of money. So I'm just curious if some of that needs to be explored even further, because really that space for them, the building really is environmentally challenged. And it is breezy, it's cold, it's drafty. I'm just wondering if there are other ways to explore this that goes beyond the building itself.
Well, I think we do need to revisit the rental, because I think that those numbers were done again as part of the original study pre-COVID. I don't think, but
well, no, the ones that they sent us, that Dan just sent was more current.
No, I guess that's true. I apologize, but I don't think we should. I think the idea of them going back into that building for any meaningful length of time is really not possible and shouldn't be considered.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I thought that one of the things that Dan said that was kind of interesting is that if he had his preference, it would be great to locate school administration adjacent to a school. So, I don't know if there's an opportunity to lease for a period of time until that opportunity presents itself with a Pollard redesign, for example.
How about Hillside redesign?
Yeah, exactly.
Too.
Yeah, wait.
Then we need the boiler.
Well, yeah, it would make sense to spend the 16 grand to design it then, but the building is there. I would imagine to refurbish it, to make it offices, isn't going to be $27 million, that's for sure.
Or a Mitchell School redesign. I mean, there's plenty of possibilities out there, and that's the point we're trying to get across. It's just walking into doing it in this building, it seems to be short-sighted, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The fields at Mitchell are not optimum because they can't get the water up at that level. It's at the highest point of Needham. So they've never been able to take care of those fields. So to the point where you would move the building, the elementary school over, you don't have to replicate the fields. You could actually then take the building down at Hillside and replicate fields there. So there's a lot of other very reasonable options out there.
Yeah, so it's going to further discussion, and as John said, it may move to the fall, or maybe they'll come back with something, after they get the financing plan. But it was a good meeting, after we got through the initial
Venting.
mentioning. And then the only other thing is that, as you saw in the email, we are supposed to have these presentations up and available for town meeting members by April 21st. So we'll work through everything so we can hit, we can
I
get-
promise I'll have mine done by April 20.
There you go. Perfect.
Carol, can I ask a question? I didn't see in here, was the article for a property purchase removed?
Yes.
Was that communicated to us? Or it was just removed?
It was, well, I think what happened was it was removed because listening to the select board meeting, it was removed because the owner refused their latest offer. Isn't that what that's what I heard from the select board. But no one told me that it was removed, if that's what you're asking.
That's my question, yeah. Has there been any communication from the Board of Selectmen to our committee about that article?
No, not to me. Louise, have you gotten anything?
No.
It was in executive session, John. They decided it, but we don't know yet.
And
Okay. Well, are we going to be informed? Okay.
I don't know.
Well, it just seems strange to me that we're asked at least twice, if not 3 times, to meet, and then somehow a decision is made and it's not communicated to us. So, but that, I guess that's my point.
It's a very good point.
It is a good point. I'm happy to follow up with the select board chair to see where that stands.
That would be great. Thank you.
I will do that. Do I have anybody else, or do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Wanted to wish Louise's grandmother, who turned 104 yesterday, a happy birthday.
Oh,
Yeah.
104.
wow.
4. Yeah.
That is
Happy
awesome.
birthday to her. That's amazing. Did she get her vaccine?
No, she will not get vaccinated.
Okay, we're not doing that on public airwaves. Crying out loud. Get vaccinated, get now.
You when you're 104, though, you got some leeway.
Louise, you have a lot to look forward to.
Oh, yeah.
That's great. So do I have a motion to adjourn? We have that.
Second.
All right, Rick,
Yes.
Dick, Jim,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Thank you all. Dave, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Louise, thank you.